Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Unfolding the Soul. Today, my guest is Calley. I've known her from a little bit later than the early days of the Awakening of the Meaning Crisis Discord server, where she's been hosting a lot of rituals for us at the start when we didn't really have our own practices, and she was like giving us a feed up into getting something actually going. So that was really nice. And her chosen subject is materialism. That's a subject that is talked about a lot, right? Like it's been identified as something that's at least problematic to have a good relation to. And I think Calley's story is going to exemplify the trouble of trying to get right relationship with the materialist aspect of our lives. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Calley, like, do you want to say something about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting me. This is great. It's really cool to see the progression since we met and worked together on different community things, and now putting content together. It's very cool.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, let's start off with this idea of materialism. Maybe give us a bit of what your conception of it is and how you found out about it, like that it's something you have to relate to.
Well, materialism is often kind of pitted against spirituality in this sort of polar oppositional way. My upbringing was pretty, I guess, more geared towards materialism. So it seems like there have been several points in my life that have been kind of flipping between the two or contrasting the two. So growing up and leading up to choosing a career and vocation and direction in life was very utilitarian, I guess you would say. It was very practical. It was, go get a good job that's going to pay a lot and do all the savings and 401k and, very traditional. My dad is pretty straightforward about those things. And I actually, through my teenage years, didn't have too much of a rebel streak as far as like wanting to be unlike my parents or wanting to go off and do something else at that point. But once college got rocky, and pretty early on became really obvious to me that was, a scam and not such a good thing. And it really flew in the face of my upbringing, which really valued education and valued hard work and sort of that Midwest work ethos, which was just, if you put in the hours and do the grind and, save up and do these things, it'll all work out. That got dissolved really quickly early on in my life. Graduating into the recession and being interested in the architectural field was sort of a pretty bad combo at the time. I was already working in construction, and then the housing bubble burst, and that whole crisis was like, maybe architecture isn't the right way to go. But I had all these, all kinds of different directions, both spiritual and material, saying, follow what you're good at and what you're passionate about, and just go with that thing and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And so I did, and that was a big mistake. So I kind of had a little crisis and was like, screw it, I'm gonna run away. And I went and I lived on a pagan commune for a while and was very involved in spiritual community. And I really felt like I had found where I belong. The sense of community was really strong at a pretty early formative time in my life. And eventually, for better or for worse, the leaders in that community and the people that I was working with and looked up to kind of convinced me to take another crack at it and go back to the city and go back to school and try to finish. The first, I'd only wanted an associate's degree, and my program actually got canceled just short of me graduating from it, and there was no way to complete it, even though they were supposedly obligated to make sure I could do that. So I kind of rage quit. I was not happy about that, and, but they kind of over the course of that community experience, it kind of wore me down. And it's like, oh well, don't be so impulsive, don't just quit because things are tough. It's not really that bad. It's not that the whole educational system is corrupt. You just it was just a bad apple. You had a bad go of it. Yeah, so I came back and it was pretty much more of the same, only worse, because I ended up having to go to private school. So it was just like, no, that was the moral of the story. Don't do that. Don't go to school. So that was kind of a shock.
I want to take a break. That's actually pretty analogous to me. Like I took a break of 2 years, and then I got back to the university, and I was like, oh my God.
Oh no, no, it's the same.
Yeah. Well, yeah, even worse, right? Because now it's the second try, and something changes in the way that you experience that. So to go back to this idea of materialism, right? So you come in this pagan cult, right? Which pagan means spiritually oriented, at least the way that I understand it, right? So is that where you get introduced to the framing of materialism and spirituality?
I would say like that's been kind of the battleground, is in different groups. When I was younger, I was in a different one that was kind of more druidic in orientation, and those things were always butting heads. And I actually worked for the people that I was in that grove with. So that was like, they were my employers. We had this very materialistic relationship, but also they were, working with me spiritually. Like we were trying to study and advance and study history and anthropology and all these other things. And so that they became kind of hopelessly entangled. And I thought that was good. I thought that was like, oh, well, these things are balanced and integrated in my life. But, it just kind of made things more messy and entangled when things kind of went south with that. So
what does it mean to have that entanglement? Like do you see that those realms have different functions and therefore should be separate, or do you think that like there's a way of managing that they weren't actually able to do that was missing?
I think that there's definitely, going through my journey and learning what I have, like now I'm in a good place where I can see where those things can be complementary to one another and not be at odds. But, at that time in the midst of high school, it was very either or. They weren't, coupled very successfully at that time. And it was a conflict of interest, basically, because there's so much intensity around that time. The demands are very intense. There's a lot of things vying for your attention, and there's a lot of pressure to get it right at that time. And nobody really tells you when you're that age, like, to enjoy the journey at that stage. It's a big rush, to get established and grow up and get a car and get all these things. And so it presented a conflict of interest, especially in the spiritual domain, because so much of studying spirituality later on as an adult became, this lesson about acceptance and this lesson about patience and enjoying the process and the journey and, taking things as they come. And that was so at odds with the force of the materialism at that time, where, there were all these boxes that had to be checked and everything had to be done just so. And, don't do something frivolous like have an art career. And, there are all these really stringent advice. And yeah, I think too much of the spiritual stuff got entangled in that same procedure. Like the process became similar because I wanted to be successful at spirituality. I wanted to be ordained. I wanted to do these research projects and publish, and I wanted to, be valued by other people and approached for opportunity, and I guess I was so wrapped up in that process with my regular material life that I didn't understand that those things should be conducted maybe differently, that maybe both of them should be conducted differently. But yeah, differentiating was difficult at that time, just because of the pace of life. It took a long time to slow down.
So that sounds like you were playing two games, right? Like the materialist game and the spiritual game, but you only had the skills or the rule set for the materialist game, and you just applied that into the spiritual frame. So I'm a little bit interested in because you said they were competing in some sense. So how did you
Mhm.
decide the priority, or like was there more a sense of like going with what's there? Like how did you do that?
Um, well, for the next leg of it, when I joined the other group, when I moved into commune mode, I think I was able to more easily give priority to the spirituality and the social and communal aspect, which I had really neglected in high school. Unfortunately, that's one of my biggest regrets in life, is that I didn't spend more time networking and just having friends and spending time, because
Is that as a consequence of the materialism
I
that
think so. Yeah.
like you just got tunnel vision and zoned out
Yeah. And
on these
everything
other
just felt
things?
so limited, and it felt like, every moment had to be spent perfectly, and, just enjoying others' company. I know now how important that networking is for business and for materialism itself, but like it's not obvious what that connection is at that time in life. So, um, being able to step away from that and just take some time and, have days that were pretty unstructured, let the social stuff really shine through and allow me to see the value of it and form those things more organically and not be so rigid. Um, so that, I think, helped me understand the priority. There's a priority beyond either spiritual or material. There's this social priority, where this human connection, and quality relationship priority that was up till that point kind of not on my radar, because it didn't fall into either of those two camps. And also there's no metrics for it, so it's a lot more difficult to navigate. There's no, how do you be successful at relationships? There's not, some bank till that will give you an answer for how you're doing.
Yeah,
You
and there's also no bank that says what is success, right? Like that's
Mhm.
so now you got three realms, and you said there was a competition between the materialism and the spirituality, and that was also in that the people that were facilitating the spiritual aspect were also your employers, right? Yeah, how do you see that?
Yeah, well, after that stage, I left that grove, and then the coven that I was with, instead of my employers, they were just my uh, collaborators, but we were still involved in business, and I still had business opportunities through them, and was able to learn a lot through more of a mentor situation rather than direct employment. Um, and that social realm really bridged the gap between the two, where there wasn't really a conflict. It's like, I could sell spiritual things and be kind of immersed in that, and be learning and providing that service, especially with like reading tarot cards. Like, yeah, it's a little weird and hokey maybe at that age, but like, what business did I have in advising anybody about anything? But I learned so much by doing that and being immersed in it and being around people who were also making their craft of that. So it really bridged the gap between those things and made them not be in conflict anymore, because I was doing both at the same time while not sacrificing the social realm. But unfortunately, that would very soon explode. The social dimension of that uh, completely. There ended up being a lot of infighting, and that whole organization fell apart. So that kind of caused another crisis, where it was like, oh, well, I thought I found the answer. I thought that the community was the solution and was the bridge between these two conflicting worlds, and now I have to go back to this really awful place where I have to pick one or the other, you know and it's right back to square one. So it kind of rough patch there during those years, without the social aspect to bring meaning, to what I was doing.
Yeah, so I'm interested in this idea of creating distance, right? Like, so in some sense, when you're employed, like you're under people, right? Like you're participating in their structure, right? And then
Mhm.
at a certain point, like you're emancipating to your own position, right? And now
Mhm.
your relationship to them changes, not only as a consequence of the distance, but also as a consequence of what they mean to you, right? So can you go into
Mhm.
that a bit more?
Yeah, well, for me, I was really fortunate, and like some of the people in the community that were my mentors did have a vested interest in me actually, pursuing my things and being successful and like finding meaning in my own work and stuff like that. But the framing was always that the purpose of doing that would ultimately be to synergize with other people and give back. So the my roommate at the time was going to law school, and then I was going back for architecture, with a lot of our emphasis being on like nonprofit work and sustainability, and you know, uh, we were very like anti-capitalism at the time, very like, you know, fight the power and all that. But it was coming from a place of like providing a structure besides just um, the structure provided by an organization or a coven or something like that. Is like being able to have more emergent uh, collaboration and relationships that aren't dictated by a company or structure or um, pay situation. So at the time, that did feel like a big upgrade and a big liberation, because it was like, we were coming back to get um, those credentials and that ability to turn around and provide opportunity for others. So it felt kind of like, okay, well, we're in the manager position, and there will be new people who come in and we mentor them. And, that continuity at the time felt really good. Um, it I don't know, also just like the progression of time didn't feel as burdensome at that time, because it was like, oh, this is the natural course of things. You have these elders and they pass on their knowledge and they pass away, but they're replaced, and it kind of eased the existential dread of feeling like, life was wasting away at that time. You know how it is, mid-20s, it's like, oh, it's oh no,
My
you just have no
mid-20s.
idea at that time that you have no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it kind of like blew up in the sense that now you were forced to pick sides. Like what are you what are your evaluations at that point? Like what are you weighing?
Then, yeah, that it was really difficult to weigh. It was really difficult, because on one hand, there's this narrative that like whatever your intuition says and whatever you're compelled to do, and like whatever you do to fulfill your own journey steps helps the whole. Anything that you do is helpful for the community, because you being authentic is what helps the cohesion of the community. But also, there's always that material, you know, uh, impression of pick the right thing, though, because there's certain things that are going to be more valuable if we want to have these things. And especially with the precarious nature of a commune, where it's like there's a lot you have to, you have to have your cottage industry set up, you have to have your revenue streams, you have to make it so you can actually pay for the thing, and then you have to be careful about the way you structure things and who you allow in. And it's just a lot of all the administration pressure that's so oppositional to the natural flow of the spiritual world. Those
Yes.
things were still at odds.
So it's like, oh yeah, there's a structure that allows things to exist, and then there's this aspiration of self-expression that you're trying to pursue,
Mhm.
and obviously these two are in conflict. And so you said it blew up, right? So what how does that work with the structure and this aspirational aspect?
um well, it blew up because there were kind of like two really oppositional factions within our organization that wanted very different things with the land. And the person who actually owned it, um, he's aging, his health was not super great, and he needed help with things. And his position was more towards just getting his own stuff secure, and not so much the development of this utopian commune thing. So like then there were these three things very much at odds, and trying to find my way in that, and what the right thing to do was, and like picking sides. That was very, very stressful. You know, it was difficult to figure out what all that meant or what you're really supposed to do. But I think that's true in lots of different modes. I don't think it's, my case seems a little extreme, with the commune thing, but I think a lot of people probably find themselves torn between those things in any kind of organization.
So are there things that you reflect on now that you would have done different, like decisions or priorities?
With that leg of it, no, I don't think there's really anything that would have gone differently. I pretty much fell out with everybody. I went on living with my lawyer roommate for a while after that, and we ended up just drifting apart, and like I just wasn't really connected to anyone in that world. I kind of kept it going in my own way because after that, we would do vending and fundraising at Renaissance festivals. So I was entrenched in that community as well. So that was kind of my way of continuing and engaging with it. So I went on to do my own event hosting and vending to keep networking with those types of people, but it wasn't really with the exact same group anymore.
Mm-hmm. So when you're hosting these things, is that because like you're running a business, or is the business something that supports you and allows you to run these things?
Well, I should just throw out that like I had no idea what I was doing. In theory, I was doing these things to support my business and to create opportunity for that. But I never made any money at my own events. It never really was about that. Once I started doing it, the benefits were much more from the networking, the sense of community after having lost the pagan side of it. Now, being just on the maker space and the crafter kind of entrepreneur space, because a lot of people in the pagan community were that too. There's quite a lot of overlap, but in just continuing to surround myself with that energy and those people and explore what's possible with community events and activities, and that was much more where the value continued to be and why I kept doing it for so long, even though I didn't make any money. And there were some people that reported they did make quite a bit, and on the whole, like my events were always very positively received. They were very inexpensive to vend at, and they were free to attend, so it's kind of hard to go wrong, And it's, now looking back after quarantine, it's just so, that is kind of a shock. It's like I'm pretty glad that I wasn't still doing it when all of these restrictions came into play, because I would have been completely out of that by force. But like it's so mind-boggling that there was such a long period that wasn't even an option, and looking at how much of a big part of my life that had become, and that culture and that source of socialization, now looking back, it's like an alien world,
Mm-hmm. So when I hear you speak, your social organization was privileged to the spiritual frame because you were in a commune, right? Like that was coming together around the spiritual aspect, and then you kind of shifted to the more material frame where you're communing with people over the basis of, well, not so much selling things, but at least living in a space where I think that dream is kept alive. So did you feel like you were still trying to make it, or were you just trying to do the thing that you wanted? Or were you actually trying to build a business still at that point?
Oh, from all of our perspective, like we were wholeheartedly like on the business side of things, and like that, I guess, afforded the sense of purpose and legitimacy to put in the time. And it's kind of counterintuitive, but like just by doing that and choosing to show up, it created the space for other connections and other meaningful happenings, and good conversations and good there's people who are like really good friends now that I never would have met otherwise because I did this thing, and you can't really put a value on that. But those are the kind of spontaneous things that started popping up. And I didn't really understand it at the time, like what it was about it. I think I had too much of a mind for optimizing it, or like, okay, well, we had this went well. How do we do better? How do we get more people? And it's still very much in that material mindset. But through that focus, it did bring enough of that magic together in the same space to create a potential for meaningful connections. So it was, it felt very gambly, it felt very random. It was just like, okay, let's try to create the conditions for spirituality to happen. Sometimes it does. And okay, let's just keep doing that. It wasn't the kind of like trust and ease that, that I was able to find after that phase of life, from kind of just giving myself permission to do things without having a business incentive to do them, because like that was my crutch for a really long time for overcoming resistance to just go to social things, because there always had to be some justification. And owning a business and having the freedom that I do is really what paved the way for that. Because when you're working for somebody else and you're on the clock, trying to justify social engagements, it's rough. It does become a math equation every time, which really sucks, because that's not what human connection is supposed to be about. But you're having to weigh, your hourly wage against, how long it's going to take to drive to a place and go do a thing and hang out with these people. And I hated those mental gymnastics. And, it was a harsh lesson for me, like having to completely make myself financially stable and independent through owning a business and taking all of the risk of that and the ups and the downs and roller coaster. It's definitely not for everyone. And so it's really garbage advice, to be like, oh, well, this will afford you a space where you can now be creative and be spiritual. Like, it's a terrible lesson, but I'm hoping we can find a better way than doing the whole business thing. But for me, that was kind of the boat. That was the vehicle that got me to what I probably could have taken a shortcut on and just been more accepting of myself to begin with, I guess.
Yeah, so that's actually leading into the question I wanted to ask, right? So you said it was a crutch, right? And the crutch can become an impediment as well, right? So there's this tension in that it allows you to do something, but then if you're not spiritually mature, right, like then the means becomes entwined in being able to do it, right? Like you start confusing them because you think they're the same thing.
Yep.
So and I feel like when you say, well, I give myself the space, right? Like that's you letting go of that entanglement. So do you feel like you needed that crutch, or was it just a convenience?
I think that there's just this whole other life rhythm that we have been deprived of in our modern age. I think that there's just this whole other structure to the way that humans grow up and age and evolve, and the rites of passage that they have, and the different benchmarks of life are just so different from what we're kind of force fed, especially here in America. I think like what I went through with my business, should have normally been, in days of yore or whatever, this whole apprenticeship period, and I think that there's ways to let that unfold a lot more organically, but the way that there's such an external demand, placed upon us, I think like, did it take longer than maybe it could have? I don't know. It's hard to say. But also, I think the biggest lesson in all of that was that it doesn't really matter how long it takes. There isn't like a correct timeline. It's okay to be old. That's not a problem, but there's such a panic that's instilled in you in your early 20s in America of like, you better not screw this up. You get this one shot. And you're supposed to kind of screw it. Like I think it's kind of natural and should be destigmatized to have that entire first block just, kind of wash. Like it's not really about that. Like you don't have to have your career figured out, pre 28. Like really, that's supposed to be your apprenticeship period. You're supposed to kind of just be figuring it out. And, it should be much more widely accepted. Like just take gen eds basically till you're like 28. That's totally acceptable. We're in such a rush. And I think it creates a lot of unnecessary angst.
Yeah, so you bring up this idea of apprenticeship, and I assume that the value that you see in there is that there's someone ahead of you on the path that you're on, and that can provide the structure for you to fail in, right? And then, yeah,
with context to your failures, yeah.
Right. That as well, yeah. And so you kind of missed that because you were kind of self-responsible, right? And then you're in this group of people that's trying to figure out this stuff together, but that, yeah, that supportive aspect, like what was that there, right? The fact that people actually stayed with you, or was it more coming together through convenience?
I think that, well, with that group, I think like what was so unique about it was also kind of its downfall. It was really trying to do a lot. It was trying to integrate a lot, because we had people from all ages, all walks of life, all faiths. It was like many different, I had some friends that were Santeria. I had some people that were like old school European Wiccan, like they were all over the place. And I think that intense openness made it really difficult to take everything in at once. And like the time and the care that you have to show to form deep, meaningful connections with every single one of those things, having them be so varied, just the sheer amount of content culturally and religiously to have to like understand all the faiths of the world, at one time was like kind of the impetus and the pressure. And it was like, you should do this. We want to have as much understanding and compassion for one another as possible. It's like, yeah, but that's a lot of books to read. Like it was just a ton at once, and it felt like you had to do it all at the same time, and showing too much like preference to one thing or another. It wasn't discouraged per se, but it almost felt like it was, because you're constantly being bombarded with all these options and all these like you, especially when it's embodied in a human being, right? When you're surrounding, and I think you get a similar effect on a college campus or and why maybe that's part of what's so intimidating is if you have this huge sea of choice, of things to be interested in, people to find interesting and learn about and, explore their way of life. If those are extremely varied, it's a lot to take in all at one time. So I think that's kind of what led it to be overwhelming, especially for people coming in towards the far end of it, because, there were all these people who had been established in it for years and they all had these close relationships. And then a newcomer coming in sees this whole thing without, having those stepping stones to, have those kind of anchor relationships within it.
Yeah, so what you're describing to me is also bringing up this idea of relevance, right? Like you get all of this information, but now you have to figure out like what's relevant to me and like how is it helpful to me. And yeah, like if there's no structure, right? Like if there's no person that's guiding you, then
right,
it's going to be a competition for these for you effectively, right?
That's why it's so much easier with a study program, and why I found it so much easier starting out when I was going through the Druidic study program, because it's like, here is a pathway, here is a program, here is what you do, and here's a bunch of people doing the same thing, and we're focused on this culture. It was much more narrow of a parameter, and ultimately I was just impatient, and there was support within that group, but it was also unsupportive. They were really unsupportive of my age, and they wouldn't pass me on the program, even though there was no stipulation that you had to be a certain age to complete it or anything like that. I was just kind of getting stonewalled about it. There's all this red tape from the administrators, and it was like, well, why are you being ageist against me? Like, I worked just as hard as everybody else. I participated in the group studies like everybody else. Why are you discriminating against me because I'm not? And I don't, looking back, that was very millennial of me to get caught up over. They just didn't know how to deal with it. They hadn't had to do it before. So I was being a little forceful and impatient looking back at the time. And you don't know when you're that age how much time you have and how much time it takes and what's realistic, especially now. Everything is so fast paced, but.
So, yeah, to go pick up back the story. So you stepped out before COVID. Like, did something change in the way that you were understanding what you're doing that made you step out?
Yeah, well, I just switched my focus. I wanted to do everything online because I was really, up to that point, invested in having a hybrid business. I wanted to have a physical presence so that people could interact with me and see the product in person and all of these things. But like, the overhead of it was just, it was always a loss. It was a huge loss. And, in exploring avenues to have a brick and mortar store or rent space in a salon or whatever, like, it just, none of those numbers were crunching up. So at one point I was like, you know what, let's just be online. At least then there's less risk and less overhead. I'm not going to keep taking this risk. So I quit hosting. I would sometimes still show at events, but that dried up too, just from too many negative experiences in person. Just people can, and any service industry person knows, like, people can just be so hateful and so spiteful and so cruel over, what's supposed to be an enjoyable. How do you not have fun shopping at a Renaissance festival? And yet, people were awful examples of human beings, and I was done. I was like, I don't want to be put in that position. So that was kind of the impetus. It was killing my faith in humanity very quickly. So it was like, for my own sanity, I need to pull out of this. Yeah, so I switched to completely online. And that was
so in that switch, right? Like, so in some sense, right, you had this third thing, the social aspect, right? And like, you gave that up. And I assume that a whole big part of the spirituality was connected to that. You gave those two things up to satisfy your materialist needs.
Yep.
Did you consider that decision in that way? Like, was that a part of your evaluation?
Yeah, I mean, it felt like a sacrifice that needed to be made to get to the level of financial independence that I thought I could then use to facilitate putting more quality into hosting again, and maybe hosting things that didn't have anything to do with money, just doing retreats or whatever, and like, in giving myself more freedom to travel and explore the world. And that was a huge impetus for not wanting the responsibility anymore of managing vendors and stuff. So yeah, it felt like a sacrifice that I was intentionally making in the hopes of freeing up more energy for that. And at the time, just studying spirituality on my own was really gratifying. I didn't need too much socialization to accompany that. I had a discussion group that I was attending with the Theosophical Society, and that pretty much covered it. It was a lot, I guess you'd say, like, older demographic. A lot of the people in that group were older individuals, but I kind of like that energy. I was always the youngest person there, and that was kind of weird, but the discussions were really good. Like, all the topics that we covered were really great.
Punching above your weight.
Yeah, it felt good. I was always being challenged, and people were very supportive of kind of more towards the research side of things. Publishing was really important to them. They're really bookish. Yeah, so I didn't really feel too much of a loss at that time. But when that broke up eventually, because the host passed away, that brought in all that existential crisis, and it does kind of wear you down having people that you really respect and look up to pass away, and mentors in particular. It's just like such a huge loss, when that becomes kind of the pattern that it's been in my life or happens so frequently. It's like you don't want to get attached, you don't want to take the risk of emotionally investing in the person, that especially that's older, because that's terrible. It's a terrible feeling. But yeah, I kind of pulled away after that to take a break, I guess.
So yeah, you were talking about COVID following this up. So did that lead into COVID? And
That was it. There's a bit in between. So after all of that stuff, I ended up being financially independent enough to take a trip to Europe. And that was pretty life-changing, because that was kind of the objective. It was like, well, I want to give up showing locally so that I can see more of the world and understand more of how they do it. And so I framed it as like this, research thing of like, oh, I want to go see how they do it in Germany. But I kind of got attached, which is bad. But, I think it's inevitable when you're greeted with that much warmth and hospitality to get a little attached. But it's that whole trip, it kind of reframed a lot of the spiritual stuff too, and being kind of both more communal and more personal. Like those things were less in conflict, I guess, in that context, because I went to the big LARP event in Germany, Conquest, and then I stopped in Italy, and I went to Croatia, an island retreat thing. And just like all of those different spots, and their sense of community was such a stark contrast to how things are in America. Just the vibe was so completely different, and I expected it to be, but it still surprised me how different the feeling was, and that brought up so many questions, like what? Okay, so
can
why
you
is
describe the distinction?
Yeah, there was not nearly as much pressure in Germany. Like just the sense of like valuing every little thing was so much higher. Just the amount of time and patience and care. Like, don't get me wrong, Germans are ridiculously critical as well. They're very, but if you're fundamentally trying your best, it's almost like they can sense that, and they just really give a lot of slack to people that are fundamental. Whereas in America, you can be trying till you're blue in the face, and it will never be good enough for anyone. And that just gets exhausting. And so I don't know, like the energy of that was just so different. And just going around and looking at the way places were, just the amount of like dedication and care that was shown to every aspect of life, just the tidiness of everything, and like how the maintenance that was put in everything. Like we don't really maintain things in America, but in Germany, everything is like really, you can see people like adjusting all these little things and just taking care. The best example was this cool thing that they had in Würzburg, or in front of the Marienburg Castle. They have this whole hillside in front of the castle. They explained it so that they could stand up on the ramparts with the cannons and shoot the plebs down below who were rioting against the bourgeoisie. So that, historically maybe not so great, but they turned it into this really cool hillside where they had subplots that were these little gardens. And you could, I guess, just like rent this as a plot that you have, and you can have a little cottage thing on it, and you can have your garden, and it's part of a bigger public garden that they had other botanical stuff too, but then they had these privately kind of owned or rented ones. And just seeing all these people out there just randomly in the middle of the day, like who has time for this, taking care of these cute little gardens. There was almost this sense of like pride and competition between them of like, oh, my little cottagey thing is cuter than yours or whatever, but like in this very deeply caring way, and all of this was put on display for the public. It was like, people were participating in this private way and expressing themselves, but sharing it so openly. And that just really blew my mind, because in America, if you have a garden, it's behind a fence. It's, a big wall on this private enclave deep in the woods somewhere or something. But there it was just like something to be shared, and something that was public and communal, and that really shocked me. They were very public about a lot of things, even just customs, like bathing together. That's different. We're very reserved about that in America, and like nudity was just very the way things were in Germany. It was just like, whoa. The only other place that had been like that was on the Commune, when we have designated skyclad rituals, but it was still, understanding of like, it's not really clothing optional on the whole of the Commune. This wasn't like a nudist one, but there would be specific instances where that would be something that was explored. Whereas in Germany, it was just like, nope, it's just a body, get over it. Like, cool.
So is that also an explanation why there was less conflict between the social and like the spiritual elements?
Think so. I mean, that's my guess. It's really hard to say specifically what, because there were so many things that were different. Just their values on everything. It was really difficult with like my, traumatic background of education, to go to a place where like, education for the most part is free, or it's like supported, and like you can go for, I had all these friends that were doing things like restoring furniture and castles, and I'm like, you what? That's not real. And yes, that's real. Like, you could be anything, and they were all valued. And that was just so crazy, because like in America, you can't choose the wrong career. Like, you're dead after that. You don't get another chance. You got to do it. And yeah, there were so many different areas that really flew in the face of a lot of my experiences. So I can't really point to a single thing that made those things more unified. But even that, the people that I played the game with, and they were exploring that space still. Like, even though Germany felt like such a massive improvement over how it is here, they were struggling to make meaning within the community and within the game that they were playing, and to figure out how to maintain contact and to work on it outside of, this brief window when there was an active campaign, and exploring like what else it could do. And a lot of the people within my tribe were, we had a lot of social workers and a lot of psychologists and people that were really concerned with like human well-being. And so it was really interesting to hear their perspectives about, privilege and like getting to take a weekend off and go play this game, and spend all this money and time and resource on creating this immersive world. Like, why can't we make our real life of that quality and create those experiences for it? And so it was interesting. Like, it was obviously work in progress, that I don't think anybody was claiming that they had it all figured out yet, but there was such an optimistic sense of hope prior to this. This was the summer right before lockdown, so 2019. So at that time, there was a lot of like optimism about what these kind of events could do, and what just community things in general could do, and how to repair that. And there's a lot of talks, of course, the meaning crisis being a main one. There's a lot of books exploring community sense of belonging, the crisis and all that. But I don't know, like, being there, it felt doable. It felt like there was something we could do about it. But then coming back to America and looking back around, it was like, do I want to try to host things here? Because originally I thought like, oh, I'm going to go and I'll learn how they do it, and I'm going to apply what I learned. And it just didn't translate. Like, things aren't the same way. So I can't just do it the same way. So I have to still come up with a completely different way to do it if I want to try to create those conditions. And that was just like such a buzzkill. I'm like, that's a lot of work right there. I don't really know how to approach that problem. I can't seem to break that down. And then when COVID hit, it was like, oh no, this is not the way to go at all. I'm in the wrong book completely, not just the wrong page. Like, we're not going to do things in person, maybe ever again. At the time, at the beginning, right at the beginning of the Discord stuff too, it's like, well, this is our life now. This is how it's going to be. So that whole line of thought, as far as like how to apply the learning, went away. But it did eventually kind of crop back up again with hosting rituals and doing the dialogos practice and circling in the different activities. Was like, oh, well, this is familiar. These are things that we did, and doing it digitally Yeah, I mean, certainly you don't get some of the same things that you would have in person, but it was still good. It felt pretty good. I think it served a lot of the same purpose. And so it felt very important to keep making that available and, having regular things. And it was cool at that time.
Yeah.
Felt,
So the internet has a little bit difficult relationship to the material, right? Because it
Mhm.
is, but it's also not, right? Because, well, one of the things that's been problematic on the Discord is to keep people to return, right? Like
Right.
to participate in a community, and it's like when you're not physically bound, there something else needs to bind you, and it's really hard. And then you have this other problem where, um, if you're participating in something, and digital participation is a little bit more distant, right? Because there's less of intimacy, there's less of
Mhm.
the things around the event, right? Like you don't really get to talk after, or make those personal connections, unless you try to force that, right? Like
Mhm.
um, and so there is an element where you have to know, right? Like you already have to be there somewhat in order to get out of it what's really there. Um, and I yeah, I don't know if you felt that distinction.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it was kind of the same problem as the commune thing, where it's like there were these long-standing relationships, and then a new person coming in, like onboarding with Discord has been an absolute nightmare. Trying to work on this on the server I was originally spending more time on before I came to the meeting crisis server, was the coffee house, and that was a derivative of the portal. And so, that was supposed to be the place where people would go after these wacky hijinks in the portal server, and kind of, you know, unwind and have more casual conversations. And it's supposed to be like a cafe, And at first, when people were really regular on that, that was sort of happening and it was easier. But if you lose any momentum with the regularity of those things, it's so difficult to get back to it. And we haven't really been able to recover the regularity of we used to have it was kind of more of an academic flavor. We had a lot of like classes, we had people giving lectures, we had different we had like I think it was geometry lessons. We had different like lessons. We had like psychology lessons, very bookish again. But when the regularity of those things stopped, it was really difficult to try anything else or try anything new.
So yeah, two things stand out to me. Like the bookish element is connecting me to the way that you participate in school, right? So it's in
Hmm.
some sense like really low barrier to entry. And then second thing is, well, like when you're participating in something online, and it doesn't even matter what it is, right? It's always in competition with your real life, right? And
Right.
like in some sense, it should be in service of your real life. So like it's almost impossible to sustain that unless there's a higher goal involved, right? That keeps you coming back.
Right.
Um, yeah, so that's really problematic. Um, so yeah, like you've gone through that lull yourself, actually. So yeah,
Hmm.
maybe is that also connected to materialism?
Yeah, well, it's just difficult. I mean, because what I do for a living is so tactile still at this point. It's really difficult to like be on Discord at the same time that I'm doing grind work. It just doesn't really crunch out. I used to have my setup a little bit different, and uh, I had the microphone, so I could kind of like half listen in on stuff, or at least be around while I was still working. But it just kind of doesn't make sense to do that. And yeah, so it is constantly a conflict of like having to choose one over the other. And we've had this struggle in other servers. There's a lot of art servers that I'm involved in too, and trying to find a way to work together on art or to motivate one another. We've had like the Creative Accountability Studio, which originally was a really positive thing that helped keep people regular, and they've said that it was very motivating for them because you come and be surrounded by that. studio kind of energy and be like, I want to go do my art. And so some of those groups have had good little runs, but it always fizzles out, because regularity just isn't there. So it's like you just have to have this critical mass of population that's just insane to get enough of a turnout at any given thing to keep the thing going along. And the amount of pressure that puts on the administration and the mods to provide is just insane. Like the burnout of that, as you know, is insane to try to keep the offerings, to keep the announcements. And it's strange because if you look at any one thing, it's like, this is you just click this thing and you go on there and you talk if anybody shows up. It seems very easy, but it ended up, when we were looking at the hours and looking at the, how much it was taken up, it's like administration is soul sucking. And like that's the, it sucks that you have to kind of pick some of the members of the community to take on that mantle, and then they don't get to enjoy the community anymore, and they get really burnt out of it, and it all.
Yeah, and they become this focal point, right? Like this lightning
Yes.
rod. Like, yeah, there's a whole mess.
Yeah, that's definitely what happened, especially here on the dark web side of things, like with Eric and with Lex. They were these lightning rods, and they got so exhausted and so burnt out, having to make these appearances and being the center of attention. I'm not sure if John Vervaeke feels the same pressure. I think because maybe he's structured it more of that way to begin with, but Lex was definitely like shocked. It's just like, I want to be able to go in there when I want to, just to have fun, just to talk about the things I want to. I don't want to be on the hook. And no matter how much, we as mods were like, you don't have to keep a schedule or do any of these things. Like there was this implied pressure that I guess was really oppressive to him, that he felt like he needed to be there, and because it was his server. It's like, yeah, it's the way that Discord is structured, it's really difficult to get around that. I have not found a good solution yet. We've been exploring, excuse me, to try to revitalize the coffee house. We've looked at all these different things cropping up, different avenues and platforms and things. And it was really kind of shocking over COVID how, Zoom got a really big boost at the beginning because they were like, oh yeah, we got this, this is what we were made for. But they didn't actually sophisticate at all. Like Zoom doesn't really have any additional functionality despite huge influx of users. And yeah, nothing really emerged as like a better version. And Discord, it's kind of weird to look at, functions we have now that we didn't have, a couple years ago. And it's like, oh, well, they've actually added a few features, but it's still not what it would take to make the administration less drudgery. If anything, I think it's kind of gotten worse with managing.
Yeah. Like they should have a separate interface that just allows you to manage, and then like
yes, or just integrate with Google better, or scheduling at the very least. That's such a nightmare, even to just like maintain a calendar. Like what it just takes all the fun out of the job. It really does.
Yeah, I get it. So yeah, like let's take a step back to the materialism. So now you're in this Discord days, and like you're having your business, and you've also been working on your own projects. So yeah, tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, the Discord was really inspiring. Like a lot of the things that ended up coming out of that really pushed me to publish more for my own YouTube channel, and was really fuel for the fire for developing some of these things. So right now, kind of my goal in integrating the spirituality and the materialism is to get back to that happy medium where they're actually serving one another, and get away from some of the drudgery of my online store and having to actually manufacture all of the things that I sell. So I started setting aside blocks of time to invest in more passive income or more publishing type of mediums. And so I worked on a book, and I worked on the Virtue Deck, which was largely inspired by conversations that we've regularly have in the Discord about meaning and virtue, and how to maintain a train of conscious thought and communicate well with other people, and just all of those things.
Yeah, we've all been hatching a whole bunch of eggs. when on there, it's like you get all of this information, you're in this space, and it just comes at you, and then you're like, oh, like what do I do with this? So you try to incorporate it in some sort of a product, but like yeah, like how do you see that product? Like you said, it's a steady source of income, but like do you have a mission, like some value that you want to express with those projects?
Well, I think this the deck project stemmed from just wanting it for myself, just finding myself, constantly referring to the spreadsheet and finding that to be kind of unceremonious and, not very helpful. So I was like, screw it. I need a better way to do these things. It's like flashcards. That's, so, flashcards for myself, just for my own organizational purposes, became, cards that were actually, I was like, well, they could be pretty, they could be colorful and helpful, besides just like these memorization tools. So I think a lot of the impetus for that was just like, I want this because it would be useful to me. Maybe then it would be useful to other people. So in exploring that use, I initially kind of had the goal of it being playable. So, we've had on the server, people have hosted like the glass bead game. There's been a lot of talk about like authentic relating games and things like that. So I originally had envisioned it to be kind of a conversation aid, and wanted to go down that route, but I found that it was just really that was too forceful. It was just really getting in the way of just making a good deck. And so I was like, you know what? I'm not going to tell anybody how they need to use this. I'm just going to make it and see what they do. Honestly, most of the time, I just sit there and fiddle with it and match up the pretty colors and, notice patterns. And that becomes kind of a meditative experience for me. But I think it could still very easily be used as a conversation starter. But as far as developing it as a product and monetizing it in the Kickstarter, I tried to explore its possible usage in connection to other divination methods. And it was kind of hard because it's like, well, it's not really oracle cards. It's not a Lenormand. It's not tarot. So I ended up deciding to call it a clarity deck because it's just clarifying maybe a set that you're already working with.
Can you expand a little bit, because that sounds like a value that you're trying to provide people a means to clarify things to themselves. So that seems to be like well, a metric is the wrong word, but a way to evaluate what to put on the card and what not to put on the card. So can you go into that a bit?
Sure. Well, the set is 144 cards that I wanted to come up with an exhaustive list of all of the virtues, all of the variants, without any repeats, without anything that was too vague or ambiguous or crossed over. And I wanted to know, if I really sat down to do it, if I could come up with kind of an exhaustive list that, incorporated virtues from around the world, that wasn't really specific to one faith or another, or one set of values. Like, what are all of the values that somebody could pull from and generally agree, like, yes, this is an adaptive property. It would be good for someone to be able to employ this in, perhaps this set of situations. So when I started to mess with that pattern, I found that the 144 was a really complete set. And, I have favorites. It's weird, like pulling through them. It's like some of them, it's just like, this is my jam. Like, I really relate to this, either like the color will hit just right. And it's different on different days. And it's like, okay, well, there's something to this, because tarot really requires, like, it's kind of writing on randomness. It's like, oh, well, it was the energy and the, was pulling you to this card. It's like, yeah, I wanted something where it was just like, maybe raises more questions than it answers, or like helps with your own process more without being so allegorical.
So, so
like there's
would it be-
reasons we're drawn to words that we are, right? They sparkle, right? That's what resonates with us. That's what it's pulling us towards, not from randomness, but from intrigue. And so I thought that would be a really cool thing to explore. Like, why am I stuck on this word? What does this mean to me? And each card has, it's got the virtue, and it's got a quote, and then it's got the definition. Because I thought it would be good to just have the definition on the card, because it never hurts to have more vocab. It's good to have a reminder and not have to look it up. So it's like, oh, if nothing else, it's a good flashcard just to learn some of these things. So this one's courage. Fortune favors the bold. So they've all got these axiomatic phrases on them. And I really wanted to explore like how those nuggets of advice or words of wisdom that you'll often get from like a parent or a grandparent, like sometimes in the wrong context, or if you're really having a hard time, they feel so callous and so cold. It's just like, oh, well, just, get good. And it's so dismissive. But other times, when you find yourself in a pickle, and you think back, it's like who said it, what they said, what the phrase was, what your, grandpa always said this thing, and it makes me feel this way. And it makes me think of him and all of those associations. So I wanted to include as many of those as possible that someone could have like a personal connection to and have something come up that they could then think about and work through,
Yeah, so that's interesting, because I've been visiting church and they have all these words, and I'm like, what are they talking about? Like literally, right? And then what's going on is it allows you to build like a personal connection to these words, right? And where you get a felt sense of, okay, like, yeah, this is what they're trying to get at, and that changes your participation, right? So you're trying to invoke a previously established connection to these ideas with the cards. So yeah, that's kind of relying on that already existing.
Yeah. And then put them in relationship to one another. Because each set of 12 is like 12 different flavors from the core one. So, exploring how that virtue gets applied kind of in different contexts, and how, I really wanted to play with the idea of like, when you're faced with a challenge, you have so many different ways you could respond. How do you know what is the most adaptive way to respond, or what's called for in that situation? How do we, it's like you said, the relevance realization. How do you know what's important to pull from? And so the phrases were kind of a fun way to, we've got these mnemonics, we've got these memory devices that are these phrases to try to remind us in a timely fashion when we're under pressure or stress, what virtue we could maybe pull from. But so much of the context of that is from like seeing it embodied in a person. We have an association of like, this person was patient. So, this is what this means to me. And, it is, I think, kind of a shortcoming of the deck then, being that it's as simple in that way as it is. It's pulling a lot from your prior associations, which may be helpful or not helpful. If you didn't have someone in your life that's embodying that, maybe you have a different feeling about that card. Maybe it's a negative feeling then, because you're like, I don't think this is important, or I've never seen this. And then it's like, yeah, but even that's a helpful card, because it's giving you kind of a guide point of like, oh, maybe this is something I need to work on and take a look at. I've got a lot of cards that are definitely like, yeah, that's not my strong suit. I should probably.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's a lot of cards to. So for Vicky, you had this idea of maximization, where you create a maxim, which is effectively the things that you're putting on the card, right? Like ways to remind you of what's important, right? Like in some sense, it's like a crutch for relevance realization, right? Like one of the things that we were talking about a lot of on the Discord is curate your signal, right? Like everything comes at you, right? Like you've had that experience, and now you can't deal with all of it, right? So you gotta stop some stuff from coming in so that you can have a right relationship or an intimate relationship with the things that you do deal with, so that they can be of value to you, right? Because that's one of the problems, right? Like you were talking about in the beginning of your story, there was this sense of rush, right? Like this need to get somewhere, and when you're participating in that way, right? Like there's a lack of being able to connect to the things that you're doing, right? Like it's a really shallow relationship, right? And I think these cards afford a space where you can deepen that relationship, right? But then that's also dependent on how people participate. So this idea of maximization is that you take a set of maxims, right, and then you try to combine them into one, right, and then you expand them and you collapse them, right? So you're creating a relationship, you're creating a participation with these ideas. So now you're making them your own, but you're also creating like a new personal maxim that has specific meaning to it.
Yeah, that was one of the most confusing parts of like trying to have this diverse set of quotes, is they're all true. In some context, all of them are really great advice. They might not all be really great advice for what you're doing right now, though. You have to make that distinction, and the way and the process by which you make that distinction is what matters. You know, it's really just about becoming more aware and more mindful of your own process and how you're coming to the solutions that you are, you know. And if you can become, you know, sit with those thoughts and look at that process and notice any place where you're being motivated fundamentally by something maladaptive, like fear, you know, or shame, you know, that's how you improve. It's not by just embodying these things. It's not just, I'm going to be more patient as a person. That's not what they're for. It's making you more aware of your own process and why you feel certain things are solutions. And if you can notice any point where the solutions you're applying are actually coming from a place of insecurity or a place of reactivity, you know, or spite or worse, you know, it's noticing where those things are happening. And those are the things we really don't want to admit to. So that's kind of what I think one of the shortcomings of something like tarot, you know, is they're really great for talking about relationships between people and, you know, happenings and things and context. And that's what makes the symbolic cards kind of more effective, is when there's a context. But like, that doesn't really help you. It tells you a bit of what's going on, but like, you already know what's going on. That's the only way that the cards work, is they're just like highlighting for you and helping you piece together a story. But piecing together a story, it feels really good. It feels very satisfying for us to do that because it's a justification. But that's not going to help you psychologically develop as a human being or be more capable of adapting to your circumstances. That's just going to paint a nice picture for you.
So you're trying to go into the space of aspiration, right? Like what is possible, and open that up a little bit, right? Like, oh yeah, you get a sense of like, oh yeah, you could do this better. And then when you get the sense that that's actually a thing that you could do, then you can find out a way to get there.
Yeah, it's asking, you know, how am I getting in my own way? You know, if I could just stop doing that, what else could I be capable of? You know, but first of all, I need to stop doing that. You know, I think it's as far as this particular set of cards gets. But maybe people could find it helpful for that aspiration too, for like road mapping.
Yeah, I do have the sense that stopping doing things is often not the right solution. Like the better way to do it is find a better way to do it, which which is obviously really, really hard, especially if you're stuck in a pattern. But and they obviously don't have to be opposing each other, right? You can do both.
Noticing the pattern is really hard, though. That's, I think, most of trauma in life, is just like realizing that you're reacting to all situations with the same response and understanding that it's going to be right some of the time. So that's how you've gotten away with it this far, but it's not going to be appropriate for every single situation. And you have to learn more tools in your toolbox for the times when it isn't appropriate and how to identify those.
So are we at the present? Like, do you feel like?
Yeah, that's the present, is just trying to trying to navigate back into perhaps the hosting space. That's an aspiration that I have right now. It's very confusing.
Physical.
Yeah, physical, given the ongoing situation, but reimagining that from the learning of the Discord, because obviously, like, that was such a huge experience. It was so different from the hosting experience that I've had previously, which was really materialistic and really rooted in the practicality. I think that that's still important to be integrated. And I think, part of why the Discord, I think maybe part of the learning from the hosting needs to be applied to the Discord. And I've been trying to figure out how to do that, because I think people are straying away because they don't have enough reasons to be there. It's not feeding enough into their material life, or it's just they're too separate. And it's not, they don't have a business reason to be there. They don't have a practical reason, like the really regular things like the daily meditation, that's part of what people would be doing anyway. So doing that together makes sense in it as under practice. But trying to figure out a reasonable, a balanced way to do it, because you don't want people to be on there all the time. You don't want to encourage people to just like live on Discord instead of their real life. Like, that's always been a conflict too. It's like, how do we get a healthy regularity where people have opportunity for meaningful connection without it becoming this intrusive thing, and it's a hard balance to strike. But I think part of it is going to be some level of materialism, some level of practicality, where people are on there because they are working through creating their own content, which I have found is one of the most valuable things to do, regardless of what that content is or what it's for or who it's for. Like, that's been so much learning within the last couple of years for me, was the YouTube stuff, and just learning video editing, learning all of the things that go into my scripts, learning animation. It's been a huge spark, for my process. So I think regardless of the level that people are aspiring to get to with something like that, I think it's worthwhile to do. Just like you learn infinitely more by teaching than you do from just straight studying. It's like, it's worthwhile to teach, even if it's not perfect, even if you're not an expert, do it because that's how we learn, So I think getting back to that mode and encouraging people to do that more in the context of Discord could be one of the things that revitalizes it. Because in the coffee house, one of the most successful things that we ran was something we called Freeform Fridays, where people were encouraged to give their own talk, and they were short. They were like 10-minute, but anybody who's been in speech class, or who's unfamiliar with Discord and, talking live and all of that, like, that could be really intimidating. But it, opening the floor for that, showing examples of that, having that become a norm in the culture and really inviting people into that. There were so many people who'd never done anything like that before. There were so many people that showed up, and they didn't hang out on the server outside of this. This was like the first, they were a lurker, and it was the first time they showed up, and they gave this like TED Talk level presentation, and we never saw them again. And it was just like, what just happened? But that was an occurrence that was somewhat regular, that had started to happen. And it's like, okay, what is this? Why is this happening? What is it about this? And so I still think like the bookiness and the academic side is important. There should be a space for that. I think keeping it to just the one day was good. Anything more than that was kind of nuts. But yeah, I really hope to continue to figure out how to bring those things together in a balanced way, because I think it's good to at least have the option. Maybe that's very American of me, but I'm like, freedom, more options, even though the decision fatigue is killing us.
Yeah. So there needs to be option, but there also needs to be integration. And the story that you told about these people coming in, right? Like, there's a lot of people who have their eggs, right, and they need a place to place them. So yeah, that kind of explains that. And the thing about the Discord is it's loose in the sense that it's people from all over the place, and in some sense a festival is the same thing, right? Like, it's people that don't have any connection in normal life that just randomly cohere, and then there's nothing to bind them because they all need to go back to their physicality. So in some sense, it seems that the extension into the digital of that these people is natural, right? Like if you want to maintain something, then proceeding into a digital community until you can re-cohere, and on the bridges of meaning, they have these estuary things where they try to get together, and then they try to organize events where there's like a bunch of people that come from all sorts of spaces, right? So there's, I think, this natural thing that goes on where when a community is bound by something other than their physicality, that there needs to be this contracting and expanding nature in the way that these things interact. So yeah, you were talking about your lessons from the online and trying to apply them offline, and the other way around. So yeah, like where do you see that going? Like do you have any ideas about that?
Well, where I started to conceptualize that was the possibility of hosting something like the rituals in person. And, because of everything that happened, the idea of being in that like religious space again, or spiritual space, however you want to say it, being that again to whatever extent was just like, ooh, kind of a knee-jerk reaction in me now because of everything that's fallen out. But it's like, no, maybe it is time. Maybe that would be appropriate to do, to try to hybridize that more, to try to build more of an in-person community that would then be online and have those people mix with people who are around the world. And, if there's enough solidity in the relationships of the in-person, then having a discussion group, those things could really cross-pollinate and be beneficial, I think. If you can leverage the regularity of the in-person stuff with the openness and possibility of online, if you can strike a good balance, that could make for a good way to vivify both. Because part of the problem in like the Conquest community, we had like a TeamSpeak server, but trying to coordinate across the entire tribe was very difficult. It was very messy. I really don't like TeamSpeak as much as I dislike Discord. It's still miles above that. So trying to keep things going during the off season was a challenge. And it was like, well, online is the obvious solution. And yet, even though we had these close-knit relationships in person, it just wasn't translating. Having scheduled meetings, it just wasn't regular enough. So there's some other balance between those two that I think needs to be struck. And yeah, so I've been thinking about exploring that and, applying the learning of the types of activities that we would host online to more of the in-person space. And it's like, well, why haven't I done that before? What is the resistance? Why am I feeling weird about even considering doing that? And I think, yeah, when it comes to like pagan rituals, like there's just, as open as it is and as enthusiastic as people are about usually like trying new things, and there's still kind of an order to it. There's a procedure that, like when you go to church, like there's kind of an order to it. You know what to expect. You have your ritual order. So anything that is not that, I think, is still met with a lot of apprehension. And yeah, so like my resistance in anticipation of that is like strong. And so I have to explore that. I have to get through that and figure out a way that it could be, there's this fear of rejection. There's this fear of like, oh, well, what if nobody shows up? Because I've hosted plenty of events that were not well attended when they, in my mind, should have been. And it's like, how do you not take that personally? What did I do wrong? It's like, well, you have to get over yourself and practice detachment, duh. But
I never had that feeling ever.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a bridge that could happen, I think, there. I think part of the learning for me with materialism is that digital is not necessarily not material. There's there's very material components to the digital in the forms of like the platforms themselves and the infrastructure themselves and the things that people are regularly accessing every day that are active tools in their lives. And I think what has made some things much more successful than others, the prime example I always cite is Jordan Peterson's website. He has this interactive tool that you're going on to use through the self-authoring suite. And so that, I think, is what really drove that success, you know, integrating those things and like having that experiential component, which, yeah, the Discord provides the experiential component through discussions and like the expectation that you're going to go and interact with people, but there needs to be more of a solitary experience too. I think if you're engaging in some kind of community or practice or cultivation, you know, having a thing that you're accessing on your own that provides some sort of service or structure in your life, whether it's you know, journaling or, you know, a solo meditation thing, you know, those seem to be the things that have been most explored so far, I think, because they're the most straightforward. But I sense that there's great potential for other products. They are products. I mean, it's a service. It's an automated service, which is very comparable to a physical product. So that's not to say I'm going to get off the physical product bandwagon anytime soon, probably ever, because I think we should have stuff to buy. I just really like that. I like the direct, like you pay this money, you get this thing. There's no ambiguity. I like that part of physicality, you know, and I think there's a lot of space for that even in our communities. And I've talked to, you know, Brett and others about possibilities of merchandising and what that would mean and what value could be created by that, because it's like everyone else is going to be doing that anyway. There's all these companies that are making horrible products with slave labor and unsustainable practices. Like, I think it's worthwhile for everyone to take a crack at business, even though it's very material and unspiritual and capitalistic and everything. They're still learning in it. It doesn't, you know, learning is what the journey is about, regardless of whether, you know, like money being involved doesn't make it tainted. It doesn't make it less important or meaningful or spiritual. Money is just a construct that we have as human beings to try to create this exchange system for the value of our time. And we've managed it badly at times, but it's still a tool for learning if you let it be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think a lot of people are wrestling with this question, right? Like we need to have a material manifestation that people can cohere around, and whether that's through organizing an event or actually having a physical product that reminds you and that allows you to be a part of something else. Like I actually got stuff from people, like they sent me stuff. So I got art in my room from people from the internet. So like in that sense, like they've come into my life, right? And
Right.
that does change something, right? Like we were talking about, well, like the physical reality has primacy, right? Because you need to live your life there. But like if you can somewhat take the digital back into your life and have a part of that is obviously extremely valuable. Yeah, like that's still a really unsolved puzzle how to do that correctly. So that's really big. So if we go like 10 years into the future, like, and you've been successful at trying to tackle this problem, like what do you see yourself doing?
Oh, wow. Well, in 10 years, I'm hoping
Or
to
5?
buy some land and have a commune again because, you know, patterns. But hoping to apply these things. I think, you know, one of the big takeaways from Europe was just like lifestyle and, you know, having a village, having a much more Dunbar number kind of like inner circle. We really don't have anything like that in America unless you're already associated with a university or something. And so one of the questions I've really been wrestling with is like, what does lifelong learning look like? You know, what is the future of education? Obviously, you know, from my past, it's like, got curious after all that, you know, what is the future of education?
Or what's the purpose?
Like? Yeah, what is it? What's up with all of that whole thing? And so part of it is like, what is the what is the lifestyle of education? What is the value that it's affording? And people that had like the campus experience, which I didn't have, you know, they talk about all of these things, and it's much more the environment, I think, than the structure of the college itself per se. You know, it's the commons areas, it's the library, it's the regularity of the schedule, the possibility of bumping into each other. And it's like, well, that's true in a village too. It doesn't have to be a college campus. You know, it doesn't have to be book smarts. It could be crafting. Like those things don't have to be so separate, you know. And I think at least here, you know, entrepreneurship is kind of like the way that people found to try to start getting around that, despite not having a lot of support for it and feeling it like it's every man for themselves in that arena. I think those things could be unified much more, once again, in more of an apprenticeship lifestyle. There could be another path, you know, other than the kind of breakneck pace that we have. So I want to explore that from an architectural perspective. I'm interested in the building of that, but I think that it's going to require, you know, however, ironically, like I think the digital is going to be required to get there. I don't think it's possible to build a successful commune, and I think that's part of why the first one fell apart for me, was like without the digital, without the regularity, without staying in contact, you know, it's like you were saying, like the festival thing, it's ephemeral, it's a bloom, you know, it's a flower in the desert, and then everything is just gone again. Like, how do you create pervasive conditions for meaningful connection? You know, how do you make you know, there's sustainability in the social sphere too. It's not just like an eco thing. It's like, how do you create sustainable social conditions that aren't just like primed for burnout or falling out or competition? You know, I think we've got these patterns that we're kind of used to in the social blooming as well. And that's the part of what happened on the servers. It's part of what happened with the commune, you know, kind of on both the digital and physical sides. Those things have to come into a better rhythm. You know, I think one of the problems too with the digital is it's really ignorant of the seasonal flow. I mean, because it's a place beyond time, you know, but like the locality still has its seasons, and people are coming and going based on the demands of that, and like kids' school schedules and, you know, their life demands, and Discord just doesn't have any way to cope with seasonality, you know, but that's a very real demand of our physical world.
Yeah, and there's also a structure element where it's like, okay, like if this thing is now, I can plan around it, right? So you need to give that structure to people.
Mm-hmm.
So you've been talking about this triangle of the social with the spiritual and the material. So do you have a sense of what the ideal version of that would look like for you?
Yeah, I think ideally I would like to see a future where like the digital has some portion, and the in-person has some portion, because I still want to be connected with people around the world, like yourself, of course. But like having that be a much more integrated and organic part of the day. You know, part of why the meditation stuff works so well is like the morning thing is like, you know, you get up, you say your hellos, you do your thing, and then you know, having a rhythm like that integrated and established, I think is part of that balance. For me, just being able to really work only, you know, work on money work half the time, and then, you know, what spiritual or creative work the other half of the time has really been the goal. As of late, I've really been able to achieve that and work on a lot more side projects and just pure research. So for my lifestyle currently, it's pretty much there. I would just like to have the social stuff more integrated as far as a community and an embodied practice, I guess, of that portion. But yeah, money and spirit are pretty good for me right now, but it's taken a long time to get there, you know, with a lot of oscillating back and forth between those two kind of being at odds. But yeah, I mean, a lot of narratives get really focused on like the ikigai thing and like the find your soul purpose, and, you know, spirituality gets really conflated with like you know, going and being a guru or like giving these spiritual talks. And, you know, I don't know that that's really any more balanced. You know, I don't think that that extreme is quite the way to go. You know, I think that the goal through all of this should be like the mindful presence, right? If bliss is living in the moment and not having anxiety about the future, not having depression about the past, not ruminating, you know, the things out of all of those realms that bring you most to the present should be, I think, what are emphasized. So for business, you know, what brings me most to the presence is enjoyment of the crafting process. And that's best contained within, you know, a half-day workday. Anything above that sort of feels overwhelming, you know, like nobody wants to sit there and grind for 10 hours. That's too much, but it's fine for a couple, you know, so like finding that happy medium. And then with the spirituality, like having the freedom to explore my own creativity and curiosity about spiritual topics without overdoing it and needing that to be some mark of success in life, or like that whole virtue signal thing that can I think I fell victim to that as a younger person. You know, I really wanted those. I'm so much
Those
more enlightened
ephemeral
than
stars
you.
on your
Yeah. Well, you don't know. I mean, well, also like during that time period really was like this boom of gurus. Like that was very, you know, early 2000s was, that was a huge pitfall, you know, because people were able to kind of come up and be so successful. And that was also kind of the boom of startups. And so that whole mentality and that whole impatience that came up from that era, I was unfortunately just really at the right age for to get completely sucked in, and didn't have enough resilience and self-confidence in my own process to resist, you know, the cutthroat game, as it were.
yes.
So that, yeah, so those are those happy media. And then for the social would be, you know, able to have quality conversations without feeling obligated to distribute my time to all these people and fulfill all of these demands, and, you know, just kind of be able to comfortably come and go as the event calls for. And yeah, having more of a village, more walkability, more of an ability to just stop and have lunch with somebody, or, you know, because right now everything it's open, but it's still kind of shut down for that. There's a lot of places that still aren't open. So yeah.
Yeah, I noticed something you said, finding a balance in the working in your day, right? And like how something is too much after a while. Like that caught my attention. Like, do you have something to say about how you find that balance?
Well, for me, like there's really obvious physical damage and neurological issue. I got the precursor of carpal tunnel because I work with my hands a lot, so I have to be very careful, you know, not to exceed a certain amount. And for a lot of my time with this business, I just took every order I could get. You know, I didn't really say no to things. I really bent over backwards to try to get things out fast, and you know, at the expense of my health. So it's taken a lot to learn kind of what my limits are and how to feel accomplished in the business and feel like I'm doing a good job, and you know, providing good service and all of that, but not exceed, you know, what's tearing up my wrists, you know. So, and part of that is just diversifying my offerings as well, and like exploring other sculpture. I have a lot of products that are molded, so working in other, still physical, but you know, doing more mixing chemicals rather than manual labor. That's been helpful.
Okay. Is there something still alive for you that you feel like you want to add in?
No, I feel pretty complete. Did you have any other?
Well, no, I think we're at the future. Yeah, like, oh yeah, well, like I guess we can visit the products, right? Like how do you see your creation of products in 10 years? Like what do you want to supply to people and how?
Well, I have other side projects that I'm working on right now. mostly board games. Really interested in games as a means of learning and the immersion of experience. So I enjoy writing as well. I like just books and illustration and design, but I would love to really bring that into a more interactive format, so that people can go and have their own experiences with it. And so I see myself working on that. 10 years in the future, I'd really like to be making more educational content, I guess, doing more videos and just exploring more about how to make education more available freely online. That's something I'm very interested in.
Yeah. So what that brings up for me is the relevance, right? Like
Mhm.
you being lost in education and how that was a problem. Like, is that something that you see yourself solving for other people?
That's that's a big question right now. I think the trick for me has been separating my interests from, I don't think my role is to solve that problem. I think my role has maybe more to do with like the UX design or the interface by which that problem could be solved. Because I don't know that I'm going to be the one to do it. I don't know that my interest is really like establishing curriculums. But as far as like making the hub or the community or the the website or the app or whatever that people would come to access that and explore that, I think that's kind of been a pretty spiritual project for me. Like that's really, it's not really for profit. It's not for money. It's more like, I don't want other human beings to suffer in the way that I did. So my way of exercising compassion is to see if I can apply some talent of mine to this problem. But yeah, it's a huge pitfall because that's a huge problem. It's very difficult to break it all down and see like where you could easily become overwhelmed with problems like that. Same as like world hunger. Like, what does that even mean? It's huge. But for
Yeah,
me,
the
the
problem is
structure has been interesting.
yeah, and the problem is making the connections between the one thing and the other thing in a way, well, that's also again not ending up being overwhelming, right? But still connecting the manifestation in materiality with something that people can navigate and participate in.
Yeah, yeah, because like the earliest bit of the education crisis was not getting into my school of choice. Was such a shock for me. And come to find out a couple of years later, there was this class action lawsuit about affirmative action stuff, and they were preferentially treating out of state students because they could charge more money than I was from in town. So come to find out, it wasn't me necessarily. Didn't get an explanation, but the amount of personal shame and rejection that I felt, I don't think was justified. I don't think I needed to feel that way. And I really took way too much on myself for being a failure and not getting in and bringing shame to my family and all this. And, raged out on that topic because it was like, well, this isn't what I want to do anyway. This is, I do, that's how you cope. That's how you deal with that kind of rejection is, oh, they were good enough anyway. So I did that, but that was over computer science. And that was kind of a big issue because my dad's a computer scientist. And so taking after him, he actually discouraged me. He, like, despite all the material upbringing and do something practical, do something, he didn't want me to have the experience that he did with the instability in the industry and having to change jobs and the risk of getting laid off and how much technology moves quickly and it's hard to keep up with. And he didn't want me to have that instability. And I didn't really know, well, there were no programs at the time. This was, a while ago. There was no such thing as UX design really at that time. And it certainly wasn't something you could go to school for. So if I had tried to go for computer science proper, that would not have been good, I don't think. I don't think that's necessarily my real strength. I'm not much of a programmer. So I would have been discouraged in other ways and gone down this other path. So I'm sure that was the universe guiding me towards my better calling. But the impetus for that was still valid. So like years later, realizing like, okay, here's the reason I valued that. Here's why I wanted to do that or what parts I found important, and it was from the user experience. It was from the value that technology can provide for connecting people. It doesn't have anything to do with working for some, big tech company, Google, like that wasn't, but that was the route that it would have gone down, because inevitably to pay for a degree like that, you have to justify it with, the grind in that way. And that would have really killed my spirit. So now it's just a matter of reconnecting with those passions, or whatever you want to call them, yeah, and finding those dreams that got lost along the way, and figuring out how to just work on the parts of it that are relevant to me and not try to take on the whole thing.
Yeah. What's
like
relevant to
that
you?
easy.
That's the big question. It's like, okay. But yeah, like we all have to take on the things we can, right? And we shouldn't spend too much time on the things we can't.
And nobody really can help you figure out, for better or for worse. There are some things that are kind of systemic problems, as far as like nobody gives you a roadmap for like good pacing in life. Like that, I think we can safely say. But there's nobody, like someone, a mentor could come in and be like, hey, this isn't realistic. This isn't really how life is paced. This isn't how your body is going to develop. This isn't how your brain's going to mature. Like somebody could come in and say those things and give us better guidance. But nobody can come in and tell you, this is relevant to you. This is what you're calling this. This is what you should be doing. Like, no one can ever do that for you. So that is still the hard part. But, if by some part of my work, I can help make more of an apprenticeship period possible for somebody out there, or like just give a better understanding of what education is for. I don't know. I guess that maybe is a spiritual goal. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'd love to see all that. And I think I'll be trotting along that path with you in some place.
I think so. It seems to be. Does that make sense to you, that the need for, maybe not so much the physical product at this stage of our community development, like maybe the need for some digital product or service that helps to maintain that consistent connection? We talked about that a little bit before, of how to maybe make the Vervaeke's work more accessible in like a guided.
Well, that's what I'm doing now, right? Like I'm trying to find the things that are accessible to people, right? And it's really hard when you're talking about a platform like this. Like obviously we've heard like dozens of people come in and say, well, like, oh, I got this great idea about this new platform. but it's really hard, right? Like what, like you can't make it too complex, and like what do you need to do? And then you get too specialized, right? And I was like, well, and then you need to get people to use it, which is maybe even worse than all of these other problems. And like I don't see the solution yet. And I also feel like you kind of grow into it, right? Like you start building something, and if it works, then it grows bigger, right? And then at a certain point you have something that's fulfilling the need. So I think it's all of these levels that need to be organized in relation to each other, and then go here into the same structure. But yeah, that's maybe more than 10 years into the future.
But that's okay. That's the thing, is like, that's a perfectly reasonable time frame. If somebody had said that to me, when I was 19, like, this is going to take 10 years, I'd be like, no, no, I'm not doing that then. That's not worth it. Like, yes, it is. That's what that's what life is. You have to be prepared to spend, your whole life on something. Like, that's how the really quality things get done. I don't know how it got in my head that things would go faster. It just,
that's what makes it meaningful, right? Like the fact that it's lasting, right? And that's the thing that materialism got us out of that mindset, right? Like materialist mindset is like, you gotta do the thing that works now, and like it's not so much concerned with the future and the potential that.
Insofar in the parts of material, I think there's a distinction, like the parts of materialism that are trying to help you avoid physicality, or like avoid work in some way. Like, that's where the divergence really comes. There's products and material things that are helping you enjoy more of maybe a thing that is regrettable. Those are really crucial, because they are helping you be in the moment in a better way. But the things that are like, here, just automate this, you'll never have to do it again, I think that's where the pitfall comes in. And that's where a lot of the get rich quick mentality comes from, is products like that. And I think understanding the distinction of those things has been really difficult as a business owner. Like what, because at the beginning, when you're just picking a business, because that's a thing you can do, I don't know, in my mind at the time, it was like, I'll just pick a thing that's lucrative, that's, that people need. And then it's like, okay, well, everybody needs to eat, I should be involved with food. There's this logic, there's this game you're playing where you're trying to pick the right thing, which is never how business actually unfolds. But yeah, I wish I had a better perspective on that from the onset, about like, I have an understanding of it now, because my product, I make hair products, and like in having a huge variety of customers and serving people for years and understanding them and their life and their needs and like what it does. Like I at the start just kind of was doing what I thought was cool, or what I thought I was good at, or what, it just started. It didn't really have meaning. The meaning was built out of the experiences with the people, and particularly clients of mine who have suffered from hair loss due to cancer. Like they helped me understand what my business was for, because I didn't really know, but it turns out it's like, well, yeah, this is not really the most sustainable thing. It's not the most important thing. It's not the most spiritual thing. It's hair. But there's this weird thing that happens when you have a good hair day, when you feel confident, when you feel pretty, when you feel like you're expressing yourself, that it opens up all these other doors of possibility in your day, where like just that extra little bit of confidence can make you make a totally different decision than you would otherwise. And it's like, well, that's where the magic happens. That's what my day job is about. So I've had to really make peace with my day job, which is weird to say, because it's like I own my business. I'm already there as far as, a lot of people would be concerned. And I sound like an ass, complaining about it at all. But it did take a long time to forge the meaning of, what it's really for.
And I assume that being on the internet as a business creates a bigger gap between the meaning manifesting and your action.
It does, but at least there's a physical exchange. Like they're getting a piece of me, like in a very felt, real physical sense. And I get, they'll send me cards and stuff. I've got, like you said, like I have things from my customers. They send like, they send little like scrapbook things, and sometimes they'll send me if they make something. Like it's very strange. Like when someone's purchased something from you, you have a relationship. It's weird. Like that level of commitment is kind of beyond even what like a lot of my other online relationships are like, because they have a piece of you. And it just opens up all of these other things and invitations. Like there's customers that I could go visit if I wanted to. That's weird, right? But that
is weird. Yeah.
That's the age that we are in, and I think like the biggest takeaway that I hope people have from watching this is like, you can have that meaning, you can forge that from anything. It can be, you can make buttons. I don't know. Like there's not a correct product. There's not a correct business. There's not a correct business model or anything like that. Like the meaning comes from the life that you create around it and the lives that you impact. So there's no correct answer. There's not like picking the right industry. There is only, going at it with an open mind and open heart and like finding your way.
Well, that's a good place to end this.
There we go. We brought it all around.
We'll place your links to your store and to your game and everything else. Like, do you have some social media that you want to promote, or like?
Yeah, just right now the art station and the Instagram are the main things that I do my personal work on, which is just the Conflux. Yeah, I'll just send you the link. That's probably easier.
Yeah, so can be found below in the description with my awesome description of this conversation. That's going to be really strange. And obviously, we want to hear the takeaways that you got from this conversation, because like Calley gave us her summary, but like I'm always interested in what you took away from it, and it's important to generate that participation in what's happening to create the meaning. So yeah, thank you for being on, Calley. I enjoyed it. I think we all learned a lot here. So yeah, bye.